Hi guys, this is Nadia from Imbali Crafts, and in this tutorial I want to show you how to create a hammered copper wire pendant. Don't forget to subscribe and join our artist community group on Facebook. I'll pop a link in the description. Right, let's get started. So to begin with, we need to create a base frame using the thickest of the wires. So for this I've used some 1.6, which is 14 gauge copper wire, and I am finding the midpoint and folding the wire in half. So I have drawn a little shape that suits the stone that I have. So I've got a fairly large pear cabochon. So I've drawn a frame outline that will actually fit my particular stone. So you're going to have to do the same with the stone that you have, because obviously they're going to be a different size. So draw a shape on a piece of paper and then follow that outline with the thicker wire to create the frame. So obviously the wire is quite thick, so it is always going to be a little bit more difficult to manipulate than your thicker wires, but just take your time and it will shape. So if need be, use your tools to help you shape it, and take your time to make sure that it is perfectly symmetrical, because obviously this sort of style, if it is symmetrical, it shows up. So you need to spend enough time to make sure the frame is shaped correctly. So just use your fingers here and hold the wire down as you bend. This gives you a little bit more control on how to shape the wire, I find anyway. Everybody has got different ways to do it. So that's what it looks like. A little bit wonky still, but you can just adjust it. So that's what it looks like. So just shape it until you're satisfied. So now I'm happy. Just reference back to your stone. So I'm laying it. You can have it either upside down or pointing upwards or downwards. I change my mind later on. So the next step we need to do is create the bail. So for that I'm using my 0.8 half round wire, using a fairly long length, and I am creating the bail using the two top wires, and I'm wrapping the wire around as neatly as I possibly can. So just keep wrapping until I get to the desired length. So I've gone roughly about 2-3 centimeters. I think it's actually 2.5 centimeters. I'm not sure what that is in inches, but again, this is once again a preference thing. You can have it longer or shorter. It doesn't really affect the design much, so you can decide. So the next step is to shape the bail. So once again, it's thick gauge wire, so you need to wrestle it a little bit. It's going to fight you, but just take your time. So we're going to bend that in and always tilt it outwards a little bit so that the loop sits on front. So once we've shaped it, we're going to take the remainder of the half round wire and we're going to wrap around all of the wires about 3 times or so. So just make sure it's neat and tidy. This is as much as to bind it as well as to give it some structure. So just make sure you've got enough wraps. I've got a little bit too much half round wire there, so if you're working in silver you may want to use a little bit less. So then I am wrapping the half round around the frame, so I really should be bringing it around the back. So next we need to hammer the frame. So I wanted to have quite a wide bottom, so I'm going to hammer from the bottom mainly. Now it's important when hammering copper wire that you don't go in hell for leather, so just take your time and flatten it out slowly. So, and also hammer into the direction that you want the wire to flatten out. Also quite important is, depending on which side you want to have some detail, hammer from the back or front. So that's what it looks like. So if you want indents to show, you can hammer the front of it. If you want a smooth surface, hammer from the back, if that makes sense. So this, you can see the little indents, that's the back. So next we need to shape the wire itself, because from hammering it will have small irregularities. So what I tend to do is bring in my jeweler file and I smooth these out. So just go over the surfaces, and we are going to make sure that everything is looking smooth. So I tend to take a needle file to create a smooth sort of tip, if that makes any sense. So just go over it until you're absolutely happy. If you have a Dremel tool, that works perfectly well as well. I'm just using a file here because that's what most people tend to have. And lastly, you can smooth out any nicks that you may have put into the wire with some sandpaper. So once you're satisfied, we're going to create the backing, the first backing with the leftover wire. So I'm going to make sure that the tube ends are the same length. Snip some off. I think I've used a shorter bit of wire. I've given you a longer length, so if you wanted to work with and create a longer swirl, you can do that. Mine was a little bit short, so my swirls ended up to be quite high. So you can do that if you want, or you can trim them off. That's up to you. So what we're going to do here is create a swirl, and to get the tip of the wire to point rather than to be a sort of abrupt cut, I kind of squeeze at the end of the wire, the tip, with my round nose pliers and twist at the same time. That way I get a very fine tip. Especially with the thicker wire, that looks really nice. So experiment with that a little bit and see how you like it. So I'm going to shape these, and once again, symmetry, pay attention to that. I personally quite like it with this, so the more time you spend on that, the better the end result for this sort of design. So we're going to shape the one side, and then obviously we're going to try and match the other side as closely to this as possible. So that's what it looks like. So that's what both of them look like. And once again, I'm going to hammer them. Try not to hammer the frame when you're doing these. You can also bend these outwards, which I have done if you want to get a little bit more detail and shape the loops. So bring these up like so, and then put them on your steel block. It's a little bit fiddly, but you'll make it work for you. So now I'm hammering from the back, obviously, so you'll get some markings. If you're careful enough, you can file these out later on or sand them off. So there we go, that's what it looks like. And the next step is we are going to create the shape that will hold the stone at the base of the pendant. So as I said earlier, you could have created a longer shape with the wires from the center. I have just added in a little detail with some 1mm wire, which is your 18. Oh, hang on, this is the 1.3, which is your 16 gauge. So we're going to create a little square shape. This will house the stone from the bottom. So once again, I've drawn this on a piece of paper, and try and be symmetrical. That's what it looks like. And you know the drill, going to hammer it now. So make sure that you remember the side you're hammering it on if you want the detail to show. Hammer, and then make sure that the hammered side is facing outwards. So next we're going to attach to the frame. So this can get a little bit fiddly. You can attach it to the swirls at the top first, but I find I get a better sort of seating, if that makes any sense, if I attach it to the frame first, because I can manipulate it. So again, the wire is quite thick, so it will wrestle you when you're trying to attach it to the frame. So once again, just be patient, take your time, and it will sit. So I use my thumb. You can see here I'm pressing the loop as I pull, which makes it much easier to manipulate the thicker wire. And then I'm pressing. There you go. So just press, and we're going to attach this twice. So we're going to do 2 loops for this. Just 1 loop is not enough, so we're going to do 2. And then the second time around it should be much easier to manipulate the wire, because obviously there's some structure already there. So just looping it around the frame and straighten it out. The more you work with the wire, the warmer it will get, which in turn makes it more malleable. So once we've attached, we're going to now bind the 2 components together. So for that, we're using our 0.8 20 gauge half round wire. So just going to do a couple of wraps, enough to bind it. It's not really that important, as it's not really taking that much of a structure, as long as it's bound together. So pull it through, and then obviously trim it off so that the wires point upwards towards the stone, so that lessens any chances of snagging. Then I always tend to come in and flatten it. I should have used my bent nose pliers for this, but they weren't handy at the time. So going to do the other side. So once you've done that, we are going to create our first hammered section. So for this, I am measuring the side of the stone and roughly determine how much wire length I need to have hammered. So then I'm going to transfer the measurement to the wire. So this is roughly about 3 centimeters. Again, I'm not too sure what that is in inches. It will depend anyway on the type of stone, the size of stone you have. So I'm measuring it here on both sides, and then the next step is to hammer it. So once again, remember to hammer the side that is on the inside, unless you want the detail. So I'm hammering from the inside because this is going to be folded over the stone. And I try and taper, so I want the middle to be thicker than the outside. So I hammer more in the center than I do at each end, because I want a sort of what do you call it, a revert shape almost. Well, you'll see what I mean. So this is what it looks like. I've done both sides, and you can see that the center is much thicker than the outside. So once again, you file and clean up. Always polish as you go along, because at some point, if you have all the wires attached, certain areas are very, very difficult to reach. So I always polish before I attach. So next, I've decided now to turn the stone upside down, because it looks much better in my opinion. You can decide to do that as well. So next, we're going to shape the wire. I have found actually that shaping the wire first before hammering is actually much easier. So in this instance, I've done it this way because I actually hadn't done this before, so I figured this out later on. So if you hammer, do the shaping first. That will make a difference, because hammered wire tends to warp in a funny way when you try and bend it. So slide the stone in. Still looks okay, despite the fact I've bent it after. So we're going to now wrestle the wire and attach it to the frame, and this will kind of lock the stone in place. So once again, because the wire is so thick, just take your time, and the slower you go, the more you can concentrate on manipulating the wire. So I'm feeding this through, and a little trick that I found useful later on is to wiggle the wire, but I'll show you that in a second with the heavier gauges. So the fact that it's hammered and that it's so thick makes it difficult to manipulate, so it takes a bit of practice. So just take your time with that and keep the loop going. There you go. Bit by bit, we're tightening the noose, and then we are, before I tighten it up completely, I'm going to do the other side so that I have some room to manipulate the loops if I need to. So if you attach it first completely, you won't have any room to manipulate later. So I'm going to do the other side first as well. So I've done the other side and I have wrapped it. So now I'm going to just do one more wrap on each side. It's simply just because one wrap with a thicker gauge wire tends to be a tad loose. So a second loop usually tightens things up quite nicely. So you see me here pulling the wire and I jiggle it, or whatever you call it, wiggle it, jiggle it. And this motion kind of tightens the noose slowly, and it's much easier than to try and just pull the wire through. So if you do that, it tightens the noose, and we are then going to tighten things down. Same on the other side. So next we are going to create the cradle that will hold the stone in place from the top. So for this is just 1mm wire. We're folding it in half, and this is going to sit over the top of the stone. So once again, hammer the tip, just enough to cover the stone. There we go. So next we are going to seat this. I'm going to feed this through and decide how long I want this to be and how big it needs to be to hold the stone in place. And then I'm going to give it a shape. So I'm curving this. Like so. And let's see how that fits. That's all right. So once again, this is a little bit fiddly at this stage, because obviously there's nothing there to hold it in place. So you need to just be slow and methodical, and manipulate the wire as you attach. Luckily the 1mm wire isn't too bad. So I'm feeding this through. And next I'm going to attach it to the frame on either side. So this is how big the cradle is going to be. Once again, as I said, fiddly business. Just take your time. Hold your thumb over the wire where you'd like to keep it in place. This holds it there. So use your thumb to kind of roll the loop through. This will prevent any kinks. There you go. Straighten it out. So just keep doing this until you're satisfied. So now I'm attaching it one more time. In this instance, I want this to be tight and attached, so I'm doing the one side fully first, as I don't want to be able to adjust it later on. I want it to be, I've decided on the size, so it needs to stay that way. So now I'm attaching the other side. Just make sure that when you pull the second noose through, the second loop through, that the cradle, so to speak, is fully centered. There you go. So you can still adjust it before you do the second loop. There you go. So next we're going to shape this wire. So this time around I've actually shaped the wire before I hammered it. So you can decide how big or small you want the bow to be on either side. So just try and be symmetrical. So I've shaped the wire, and now I'm going to hammer the section that is going to sit over the stone. Again, remember, do it from the inside so that the indented side is hidden. Do the other side as well. And that's what it looks like so far. So I'm satisfied with that. And this wire is going to come out at the bottom of the stone around the tip. And this will sort of lock the stone in place from the bottom as well. There you go. So when you're pulling the wire through, put your thumb over so that it doesn't get distorted as you pull the wire through. So the other side as well. And just try and once again be as symmetrical as possible and adjust until you're satisfied, and then tie off. There you go. So one loop. And then press the wires down, but be careful. I'll show you why just now. So we're going to do the other side. So I was going to use those wires, but because I pressed too hard, one broke off. So improvising, cut the other one off as well, and we are going to use the top wires only. So what I'm doing here is using the leftover wires from the first sort of wrap we've done, and I'm shaping this in a clockwise motion, and I'm kind of following the lines of the design to the bottom of the pendant. So I'm shaping it, and then I'm going to create a little detail swirl on the side. And I always work, when I work symmetrical, I always do one side first, and then I follow suit with the other side in small steps so that I can make sure that everything is symmetrical. If I do too much on one side, then I have a hard time to keep the symmetry. So I tend to do both sides at the same time in small steps, if that makes sense. There you go. Happy with that. So once you've done adjustments, if you need to, we're going to shape the bottom swirl. So once again, thin out the wire by squeezing and then rolling it. So just make sure that obviously the wires are the same length. Go, and then we are going to roll this in again, and obviously make sure that they're same shape and size. I spend quite a lot of time once I've done something to manipulate and change. You don't see all of this because obviously you'd be bored to death watching me do it. So in between the shots, I adjust until I'm happy. So do the same until you're satisfied with your piece. Adjust until you're happy, and then you can then move on to the hammering section or the tying down section. So adjusting this. And just make sure everything is perfectly symmetrical. So next, I've shaped it. I'm happy with that, and we obviously need to hammer the swirls again. So you can bend them out of shape slightly. Obviously, be careful you don't distort them to such an extent that you can't, put it back into the shape it was before. So we're going to hammer the swirls. I'm hammering here from the outside, but really I should be hammering from the inside. So I am bending it a little bit more, just enough so I can actually reach the inside. And then once again, make sure you flare out the wire the way you'd like by using, hammer in the direction that you want the wire to flare out. So next we're going to attach those swirls to the frame, because obviously these are areas that can get hooked on clothing or any other articles of clothing, anything that you wear. So you want to make sure they're tied down properly. So again, with your half round wire, do a couple of wraps, and that's what it looks like. So we do both sides obviously. So next we add your accent bead. So obviously whatever you have handy, whatever fits into the space that you have left at the top, you can fit a bead into the frame. So mine was I think it was an 8 or 10, it was an 8mm I think bead, and it fit perfectly. So obviously I've tried different sizes, and this one was what worked for me, so you need to do the same with yours. And we are attaching this bead to the back because we don't really want any wires running over the front wire of the frame to keep it tidy. So cut this off. don't need it anymore. You could use these wires to create some additional details. I just wanted to keep it a bit more simple, so I've trimmed them off. And that's that. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this, and don't forget to subscribe because I upload new tutorials all the time. And if you want to, why not join our artist community group on Facebook? It's called Wire Wrap and Jewelry Artists Worldwide. We always have some fun challenges going, and in general we are an awesome bunch, if I may say so myself. Also, I'd love it if you could pop over on my social media. I've got Instagram, Facebook, occasionally TikTok, so I'd love it if you could pop by and follow me. I always have some brand new tutorials on my website. I also do kits for some of my jewelry and tutorials, so why not pop over and see if there's anything that tickles your fancy. And that's it. So thank you so much for watching, and see you soon.